Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'll just first start by introducing myself and some of the other presenters today. We will be investigating several aspects of the impacts of climate change and climate policy. My name is Noel, and with me today are Abbi, Cliff, Leila, and we are all either ENROADS ambassadors, or one of us actually works on developing the ENROADS platform. So I'll let you guess who that is later. I'll just give you the quick results of the poll. About I don't know, over 80% of the participants today have heard of ENROADS. Under 20 have not. So an introduction for them. We'll try to cover that briefly in the beginning. About 40% have either been through a workshop before or are ambassadors today. And we'll go ahead and dive right in. So we're going to use an interactive tool called ENROADS. It's developed by Climate Interactive, a leading nonprofit climate and energy think tank in partnership with the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. Our agenda today is a brief introduction to ENROADS. We're going to talk about a scenario of climate success. So all of the policy levers that are associated with hitting 1.5 or thereabouts with the temperature impact. And then we're going to deep dive into a couple of the impact areas that the ENROADS tool allows us to investigate. We're going to talk about the rising ocean. We're going to talk about financial impacts and the health impacts. Hopefully we'll give you some talking points or some items of interest for your member of Congress. We'll then have a breakout into each one of these. So you can choose which breakout you want to learn more about. And we have an expert in each of the breakout rooms to go a little bit deeper into each of the three topics. And then we'll do a really brief wrap up at the end. So we're using a powerful climate simulator tool called ENROADS. ENROADS helps people learn about and assess the impacts of different approaches to addressing climate change. ENROADS is powered by the best available research on climate science and solutions. It's transparent. All of the equations and model assumptions are open source. It's dynamic. The assumptions are adjustable, and it's fast. It runs in real time. The baseline shown here is the model for the current policy. And as you can see, this results in a 3.6 Celsius or 6.5 degree Fahrenheit heating of the planet, also known as hothouse Earth, or at least well on our way to hothouse Earth. The policy levers at the bottom are what we can use to demonstrate to policymakers what are the most effective policies. One big caveat of the model is that this is global in nature and assumes that all jurisdictions on Earth enact them. So let's go ahead and dig into the policy tool a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the tool. Let me go ahead and share that screen. And let's kind of walk through the tool at a high level. So you can see we've got a number of graphical views that we can see. We start here on the right, and this is our goal, is to get this 3.6 C down to somewhere below 2 and hopefully close to 1.5 C. Over on the left, we've got the primary sources of energy. We've got your traditional coal, oil, natural gas. The green is the, of course, renewables and bioenergy, and a little slight blue line for nuclear. And you can see this runs over time. So to give us some flavor of how we're changing that dynamic. And again, related to getting the temperature down is getting the use of these fossil fuels down to 0. And this is the CO2 greenhouse, the greenhouse gas net emissions into the atmosphere over time. And again, this line also needs to get down to 0 or very close to it as well to reach our goal. There's a number of other graphs. When you do get into the tool, you can change the graphs that you're looking at. You can look at the different graphs in one view if you like. So this is again a number of different ways that you can look at the impacts. You can really spend a lot of time diving into different areas of this tool to understand it. You can see as we move sliders on here that each of those are dynamically adjusted to show what the impacts are. Going home is easy. We can reset our policy assumptions, reset our graphs back to home. And now I'm going to talk about the levers at the bottom. So we've broken down the policy levers into different categories. The biggest one is on the left, and that's the energy supply. It covers coal, oil, natural gas, bioenergy, renewables, nuclear, new zero carbon, which is maybe a fission, something that has been in our future for 30 years and continues to be 30 years out. And then carbon pricing, which folks at CCL are quite familiar with. And then we have the transport and the building sectors and efficiency around those. So policies that drive efficiency and policies that drive electrification of those sectors. There's a growth sector as well. And you can put in policies to either incent or disincent both population and economic growth. Just from my own advice and use of this tool is I tend to stray away from those. They can sometimes lead down, I guess, down rabbit holes that you might not want to go down when you start talking about limiting or incentivizing population or economic growth. And then we've got land and industry emissions. Two important ones here is deforestation, or you can disincentivize deforestation. And then methane and other is really important. That talks about land change use, agriculture, the emissions from fossil fuel plants, I guess, well, you know, like methane and other F gases. So really important lever there as well. And then carbon removal technologies. One is afforestation, which is kind of nature's technology of planting trees, and technological. So that might include direct air capture and technologies like that to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So there's a lot here, and I'm going to go ahead and design a scenario for everyone that gets us to 1.5 C or thereabouts, somewhere close to it. And I typically do this in a workshop that takes 90 minutes, and I'm kind of cramming it all into 7 minutes or so. But this tool, you can go ahead and spend a lot of time. If you want to use an afternoon, you can get lost in this tool. There's a lot there. One other, I guess, a couple of points as you do dive into these. Each of these 3 dots includes the information and assumptions regarding that that policy lever and the things that you can do with it. So you can see in coal alone, you've got a number of subsidies and policy options that you can use, including coal carbon capture and storage. CCS technology is actually located in the coal one. So there's really a lot of flexibility with the tool. All the assumptions are given. There's help where you can look at different examples of each of these. So this is in each one of the policy levers. It's got all of the formulas, the options, and the information that drives that. So jumping right into trying to solve this problem, I'm going to go ahead and put on a big carbon price that's very similar to the CCL policy. This isn't exactly it. I could go in and design that exactly, and if you spend some time with the tool, you can do that. But I can tell you that this is a fairly good approximation of the impacts of the CCL carbon fee and dividend plan. So we put a very high carbon price on there. You can see we've already mitigated much of the problem. We've gotten down from 3.6 C to 2.6 C. So that's a fairly dramatic change in that. And I will tell you, by going ahead and putting prices on coal and oil and natural gas at this point doesn't have a whole lot of additional effect, because the carbon price has effectively negated the need to do those individual policies. So one of the beauties of this is it's rather simple and easy to understand, and it applies across the entire spectrum. Nuclear, we can incentivize that or de-incentivize that. You can see it doesn't play a big part in moving that needle either. So if you were thinking nuclear is the solution, we can subsidize that heavily, and it really doesn't get us much farther. Again, kind of leading to carbon price in this energy supply grouping of levers. Carbon price, you will find as you play with this on your own, will be the most effective. The new zero carbon one, again, if you look at that, you've got discovering a brand new cheap source of electricity that does not emit greenhouse gases. Yes, we want to do this, but it's kind of a, I guess there's a lot of hope involved with that. So working on things that we know, carbon pricing is the lever I'll use. And again, we can put that out there and you can see that it's not really generating a whole new or reduction in the energy. It does actually, if you look at the graphs, might take away from renewables, but it doesn't knock down the price, or I'm sorry, the temperature. Transport, we're going to say, yep, we need to be more efficient. We need to be more efficient in our buildings. We need to electrify them as well. Okay, so doing all of that, that moves the needle as well. We're down to 2.2 C, so we're close to 2, but we're not done yet. And so we've got deforestation. Let's stop cutting down all the trees and let's plant a whole bunch more trees. So we've got 2.1, and then methane and other. So this is a big one. So we're going to go ahead and say we're going to heavily regulate methane emissions due to land use change, agriculture, and industry. And we're still close. We're at 1.7, and let's just say we did do something in the tech space and direct air capture. So there's a model. We did it. We solved it. We have to get every jurisdiction in the world to do that, but it is in fact possible to do that. And this is the model now. As we go through the next slides, we're going to be talking about a scenario very similar to this, or actually this scenario where we now see the impacts across those 3 areas that we talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and stop, get out of the tool, and bring back the slides again. Can you all see my screen, I hope? All right. So that scenario summary, 1.5 degree is still attainable. Carbon pricing is the most effective lever. We need most of the other levers, however, to make it to our goal. And we know that political will is the barrier to implementation. So these technologies exist to do it, and the simulator tells us that, and we really just need to get our politicians to get on board. So let's get into the impacts analysis. We're going to talk about these 3 impacts: the ocean rising, financial impacts, and health impacts. And I'm going to go ahead and jump right into our sea level rise impacts. So one of the things we know that sea level is a tough one. Some of the impacts are already baked into the ecosystem. However, you can see the curve start to level off up here. So this blue curve is the impact. So with the reduction in emissions from this scenario that we ran, this is our 1.5 C scenario, that curve of the temperature rising starts to level off, and it's going to peak some point in the future beyond 2100 and level off and hopefully go down from there. But the benefit of the policies that we put in place is that this curve is in fact peaking, and as opposed to going up exponentially. However, coastal communities and others, as we will see, will have to adapt. This is a difficult message to share for some, but as climate communicators, we need to have the straight truth, and we're going to talk about that today. So the New Jersey Shore and most beach communities along the coast won't survive this century intact. This is unfortunately already baked in. When you look at the model here, the blue area is land that's at risk to the ocean rising. The green area is land that is saved by the policy actions that we put in place. And this is in the year 2100, and you can see that the policies to keep us to 1.5 C don't actually mitigate the impact and don't save these communities. There are pretty dramatic impacts across the Jersey Shore, and this is in the year 2100. If I told you that the ocean rising continued beyond 2100, and you can see this is what's called long-term equilibrium, and in this model you can assume that that's sometime beyond 2100, likely hundreds of years into the future, but the impact is now complete for the shore communities. But you can see from the green now, the green is the areas that the policies recommended will help and reduce the impact. The bottom line, however, is that we will, as a society, need to adapt to the rising ocean along many of our coastal areas. The impacts to Philadelphia. So I did notice note that it's not just the coastal communities that are impacted. So the impact to Philadelphia are also felt in the year 2100, as shown here. The Philadelphia airport is starting to submerge or be submerged, as well as much of the Southwest Philadelphia, where I first lived, and the Navy shipyard. You can also see how the PEZ plant will succumb to this as well. There's been a lot of talk about that lately. This is where we had that big explosion and fire in South Philadelphia. The green areas show how our proposed policies have delayed the impacts, which I will show you on the next slide. Again, this is the year 2100, and this is kind of the southern portion of Delaware County over here in Philadelphia. And when we get into show the entire impacts to Philadelphia, this is beyond 2100. Again, this long-term equilibrium. The impact is complete for the airport and all of Southwest Philly, the shipyard, much of South Philadelphia, and all of Camden. Yep, this includes the stadium areas as well. The green here shows that again, the impacts of the 1.5 C scenario, the policies that we put them in place do have a lot of, or do you say much of the city? The policies enable Philadelphia to remain a viable city into the future. It looks like, however, the airport may have to be relocated or some large civil works to keep that intact by holding back the water from the Delaware River and ultimately the ocean. So the Delaware Bay is going to be impacted in the next 30 years. We're going to see some pretty dramatic impacts from ocean rising. That's another kind of neat portion of this tool is we can slide this around. And so we can see that this is in 2030, I'm sorry, yeah, 2050, 30 years from now. There's pretty dramatic impact across the Delaware Bay. Looking at Wilmington City, it's going to lose all of that new development along the Christina River by 2100, and much of kind of that area down by the docks will be impacted as well. But there's a lot of development. I used to work down in Wilmington for years, and this whole area around the South Market and Walnut Street have been heavily developed over the last 20 years, and they're going to be severely impacted by this as well. And in 2100, again, I say in 2100, it doesn't happen instantly. It's going to transition to that over between now and 2100. It'll start to get more and more flooded. And the Chesapeake Bay is also severely impacted and again in the year 2100. You can see a lot of the low-lying areas that in some of the islands are impacted pretty heavily as well through the year 2100. And then finally, Washington, D.C. is going to require some expansive civil works to hold back the water. The policies proposed make this possible. You can see a lot of green area here. These are just a few of the impacts to the mid-Atlantic region, but all coastal areas are at great risk, including all of South Florida. And Leila will guide you through a deeper discussion on sea level rise impacts in the breakout sessions. Let's jump over to the energy story. So one of the pieces on the financials is the cost of the energy increase is offset by the revenue. It's kind of the neat story. So the story here is that the revenue from the carbon fee that we implemented in the year 2031, it's about $6.8 trillion. That's that bump here on the left chart. I told you there's so many charts on this, but the revenue and costs from taxes and subsidies right here in 2031, it's about $6.8 trillion. But the increase in energy costs in that same year is 5.3 trillion, which says that the revenue can be distributed to offset the increase in energy costs. This is about as good a story as you could ask for in support of a carbon fee and dividend approach. The other amazing conclusion that I make is that with the policies proposed, the long-term cost of energy drops by 50%. You can see that over on the right of that right chart. But there is this transition phase of about 10 years after the policy is put in place that we need to get through. And that dividend handles that with a bit of room to spare. You see that renewables are decreasing in price whilst the fossil fuels continue to increase. This is probably one of my favorite views in that comes out of the financial component of En-ROADS. And this is largely another view of the energy picture, but focused just on the electricity sector. You can see a large spike in the kilowatt hour charge for a short time and then a large drop off before it normalizes in the long-term norm. I conclude again that this transition to renewables will eventually drive down the cost of energy, but the policies we recommended are accelerating this and allowing great savings to consumer to happen sooner. It also tells me that the other components of this transition will be harder as the grid appears to be going to the lower price of renewables on their own, but just not fast enough. So my takeaway from this slide is renewables are way more cost effective in the long term, and with some help, we can get there faster. And then there's this GDP picture. And so a number of models have been developed to reflect the impact of the global GDP from warming on the planet. While there's considerable deltas in the studies shown, they all depict a reduction in GDP with a hothouse Earth. This scenario is developed largely mitigated the GDP impact of each model. The chart on the right indicates that with changes proposed, the economy is more efficient, i.e., the energy required to produce Earth's products has gone down. This also ties with the prior chart, which shows a lower cost of energy in a future state. Cliff is going to do a more detailed review of the GDP impacts in this breakout, where he actually implements one of the GDP models and shows how the policies really reduce the impact of climate change as it has to global GDP. And we're going to go ahead and dive into the health benefits. So this is also one of my favorite views. You can see on the right the dramatic impact from reducing the burning of fossil fuels, primarily coal. I will note that this is largely due to the carbon price. The chart on the left shows the reduction in additional deaths from extreme heat. Combined, these two charts depict dramatic health benefits due to these policies. This last slide shows more detail for the impacts on heat-related deaths, blowing it out to show all the regions of the world. And Abbi is going to lead a more detailed discussion on how to leverage this for communicating with your member of Congress. So in summary of the impacts, we need to adapt to rising oceans and sooner than we thought. Accelerating the transition to lower cost renewables is one of the impacts of our proposed approach. We get there sooner. The carbon dividend can cover the transition costs. So this is like a really good news story. It's like, yeah, it's going to cost money in the near term and drive up costs, but the carbon dividend more than accounts for that. And lastly, there's vast health benefits to transitioning to the clean energy economy. So we're going to talk again, just at a high level on what we call multi-solving before we jump into the breakout sessions, and we'll let you choose which session you want to go into. But multi-solving is when there are, you're solving more than one problem with a solution. And here's a couple of examples over the next pages. So health benefits are far outweighing the costs of meeting climate change goals. And here's an example of that. The health benefits from wind and solar power in the United States alone from 2007 to 15 were even greater than the climate benefits. So the avoided climate damages were listed as $32 billion between that time, but the health benefits were $56 billion. So we were going into this looking for climate benefits, but the benefits to health in the United States actually far exceeded the environmental or avoided damages from climate change. So in the job sector, for money invested in energy efficiency and clean energy in the US, 4.2 million jobs will be created by 2030, and the employment rate reduced by 1.5%. And as CCLers, this is a story that we're familiar with as well. This transition to the clean energy economy ends up in more jobs, not less jobs. And then kind of globally, limiting, again, implementing a model similar to what we've put out by keeping it between 1.5 and 2 will prevent 153 million premature deaths from air pollution by 2100. That's just amazing. It's phenomenal. And then save 1.2 trillion a year due to health benefits and clean transportation. So really huge benefits in terms of human health, and yeah, pretty amazing. So, and then just in the US alone, the health benefits of climate action, this is again just in the 10-year period, almost 300,000 premature deaths are prevented, almost 30,000 emergency room visits for childhood asthma, and 15 million adult work hours lost per year will be prevented. And again, these are messages that you can use on different members of Congress depending on, how they view and value these. So looking for ways that you can use this information to help communicate. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go into 3 breakout rooms for 15 minutes and allow folks to dive a little bit deeper into each of the topic areas, ocean rising, financial impacts, and the health benefits. And, we'll come back and have a brief discussion. How can we, as you go through this, right, talk about how you can use this to communicate with your member of Congress. Are there other impacts or ways that you see this, this tool and this information could be used in those conversations? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And let's ask folks to go into breakout rooms. Thanks, sorry about that. Yeah, hi everyone, welcome back from your rooms. I hope you had a good conversation with each of the leads. We're just gonna do a quick debrief. I'll ask each of the leads to kind of just share some of maybe the themes or other topics or questions that came up, kind of share with the rest of the group. And then we'll open it up for general questions as we have a few minutes still. So let's start with Cliff and the financial impacts.
Let's see. I think people were astonished about the level of the impacts from climate. I mean, they're $145 trillion by 2100 is a staggering amount, and I think we played a little bit with some of the knobs for how quickly the carbon tax is ramped up. We shortened it to 2 years, and there was a small improvement in the GDP impact. We looked at population a bit. The knob you told us not to touch, but that had very minimal impact as well. It actually had a big impact on GDP because the number of people producing products goes down. So it actually impacted GDP. So it's not a good solution. Also politically not good, I'm sure. I think that's it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Cliff. Abby, you want to go ahead and talk about health?
Yeah, we had a good conversation about what types of graphs might be good to show to a member of Congress. Like what would, if you just took a screenshot, what would really make an impact with someone? We also talked a lot about the EJ screen tool, which is a new kind of a more local focused map. So like for particular members of Congress, if you want to see health impacts and climate change impacts, that's a good one to use. It's a new tool by the Environmental Protection Agency. So we didn't pull it up, but we were able to share that resource.
Leila, you want to tell us what you guys talked about in this sea level rise?
Yeah, we had a lot of great questions. Tom brought up storm surge, that the maps in ENROADS currently don't allow you to adjust storm surge, but as I related, we're actually working on them to integrate that as a new feature. So you might see that in the near future. Also had a question about the assumptions that go into the map and whether you can adjust them or not. So I showed like the full version of the map on Climate Central's website that lets you, that has a setting to adjust climate sensitivity if you want to adjust assumptions there. And then we had another question about timeframes, like when we'll actually see this. So it was a good discussion.
Thanks for that. And I'll go ahead and open it up for any questions that folks have, either about any of the topics we brought up or the ENROADS tool in general. And I did allow folks to unmute and ask the question directly. And if folks want to, raise your hand, and we can kind of call on you and let you unmute. So if you, if you have a question, just go ahead and click on the reactions at the bottom and click on the raise hand button, and we'll go ahead. And Linda, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I was wondering if there's a way to include policies like the reducing leakage in refrigerants that are highly potent greenhouse gases, if that's a policy.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. The F gases are included in the land and industry emissions. I'll just, I guess, let me see. I'll just bring that back up real quick if I can. So if you, you see my screen down here on the methane and other, you can bring that one up and see the things that it hits. So I believe it's got, here's the energy and industry emissions, CH4, N2O, and the F gases. You can go ahead and specifically target a reduction in those gases as part of that lever. So yep, it does include that as well.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Blake, go ahead and unmute yourself, Blake.
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead. We can hear you.
Oh, hi. Yeah, hi. I'm Tom. I'm sharing the screen with Blake.
Hey, Tom.
The question I had is, this year there's been high energy costs in the United States and around the world. Do those high costs show kind of comply with what En-ROADS would show in terms of energy, increased cost of energy? Is there any like correlation or any validation that can be attributed to what we're experiencing now with high gasoline costs and home heating costs? Does that?
Yeah, so great question. And I think the way I'll answer that is, En-ROADS does make adjustments to their models as the models improve, but theirs is I guess, more macro based, longer term impacts. I think what's going on in the energy sector today is, I think I'm not an expert on the economics in the energy markets, but I think it's related to supply chain disruptions and the changing behaviors of people due to the pandemic. That's causing demands in different sectors that were unanticipated, and the markets just haven't reacted as quickly as people would like to level things back out again. So I think that's what's going on in the energy markets. And I don't know that En-ROADS is that. It really don't. It's really not a long-term model effect. So the answer to the question is long-term. They update the model based on changing scenarios and as they update them, but it won't. It probably isn't going to account for more short-term disruptions in the supply chain, things like that. Okay. And if any of the other experts on our panel today has anything additional to add, please jump in.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Blake. Any other questions?
You can blame. Sorry.
No, I'm just gonna put in a chat a link to, I think I direct messaged someone this instead of the whole group, but someone had asked about population, like the effects on population. So I'm gonna repost it in the chat for everyone. This is just a tool where you can find information like that in the US.
Is that the impact of sea level rise on population?
Yes, and
Okay.
you can also look at the impact on infrastructure and schools and like a bunch of different variables.
So in other words, for a given area, you can look at the number of people who are impacted by sea level rise.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Yep. Very nice.
This is Jill. I have a kind of a specific question. I'm having a back and forth with somebody. Is there anything that shows that the reduction of plastics would have any impact on climate?
I don't believe the models account for plastic production, only in that, I guess it might reduce the use of fossil fuels in production of plastic, but I don't think specifically plastic reduction is in the models, but I'll go ahead and ask if any of our other panelists have any more information plastic reduction?
Not that I know of. I don't know of any impact.
Well, that would be like whatever emissions that put out, that would be looped in because the model shows like coal, oil, natural gas. So whatever they use in the production of plastic,
Right.
it would just be looped in with
Yep.
that lever.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think there's a specific policy lever on plastic reductions though, that the tool
Okay.
uses. Yeah.
All right, thank you. As I say, that's a pretty, I just have this thing going with this one person about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Claire, do you have a
Put my
question?
hand down.
Oh, you can just click back on the hand up. It'll go down. Yeah. Claire, go ahead.
Starting the video. There's a comment in, it's a powerful model, and in using it in reaching one of our Jamie Raskin's office, I found a very receptive staff member where I was able to email, rather than using the screenshot, had him open it in real time and said, use the dial to see about carbon fee. Because keeping it, he said, I want to just pick one issue, talked about carbon fee. Someone has to actively on the other side engage one metric, because I do research in science, but they want one metric to look at, and it was very powerful. They could see it in real time, and it made impact on that staff member. So just food for thought on a possible way to convey a use of this really powerful model.
Yeah, that's great advice, Claire. Thank you for that. And I'll share. I've demonstrated this model to several members of Congress, staffers, and I think a state senator as well. Yeah, my state senator, she was in one of them, and the staffer for our member of Congress, and it does have an effect and an impact. And I'll say, the takeaway for this group is if you think this tool could help in communicating to your member of Congress, reach out to myself or one of the other ambassadors. And we're available. We can come to any one of these meetings to assist. You don't have to try to be an expert on this tool yourself. So one of the ambassadors in Citizens Climate Lobby that can be invited and go to those meetings. So I'll pause and let Eric ask his question. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great presentation. I'm curious, what kind of pushback do you get if someone questions the model or says, oh, there's so many models out there, or I'm not even aware, this is the one model I've kind of played with the most and seen the most, but I imagine there's some others in this space that things. So
yeah, it's a good question. So this is actually a simulation on top of several different models, and when we went through the ambassador training, it actually showed really kind of the top 3 or 4 climate models that are out there, and where the this En-ROADS simulator kind of sits kind of within that spectrum. But they're all generally in agreement with the impacts to temperature and the other impacts that occur. And so I guess the answer is it's built off of the world's leading climate models, and it's kind of a summary to all of those. And I'll pause there and see if any of our other ambassadors, or if Leila, if you have anything to add on how we represent the different models.
Well, I would just say, Noel, that I think one of the things that the folks do at Climate Interactive is they're constantly comparing the results from the En-ROADS simulation to various integrated assessment models. And they find that in general, they're in quite good agreement. Not perfect agreement, but certainly good enough for simulation of this level. So I think the folks at Climate Interactive are doing a lot of validation with other models, so to make sure this one is okay.
Yes, and I totally agree. And I think they're actually revising their sea level rise model too. So it's more in line with the new AR6 report from the IPCC. Oh, and just FYI, I posted in the chat a map that shows locked in sea level rise by 2050, assuming 1.5 degrees of warming by 2100. That means by 2100, warming will peak at 1.5. But the map actually shows what sea level rise will be at in 2050, or at least what we project it maybe.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
And I put my email in there if anyone wanted to, if anyone wanted to, meet with a member of Congress and have an ambassador, you can reach out to myself or Abby or Cliff, and we'll be glad to help you. So, Ben, do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Go for it.
I clicked, Leila, I clicked your link. It's really cool. I wonder if, to be optimistic, one thing people don't realize when I talk to people is that we'd always talk about, warming of 1.5 degrees C. They don't realize that right now we're at 1.1 already. I wonder if we might start the graph at 1.1 instead of 1.5, just to show that there is a potential case. It may not be achievable, but that would show that the borders are just what they are now and have it be labeled 1.1 to drive home the point of where we are now.
We do actually offer that for the long-term map, but for this one we didn't. That was that was outside of my control. But
Okay.
for the long-term equilibrium map, you can take it down to 1.1. And I think we're at 1.1 as like a decadal average, but in this particular moment, we're already at 1.2.
Well,
that's
we might. There's a 16% chance that we're already over 1.5. They say, but I like to get across to people whenever I can that it's not 1.5 degrees from now. We've already used up most of that. We're at 1.1. We only got 0.4 to go, or maybe it's 0.3 or something.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, parts of the globe have already exceeded the 1.5.
New
Right.
Jersey.
Arctic regions, for example, have already exceeded that. So, yeah.
I think we're at time. I'm gonna again thank my my three experts, Leila, Abby, and Cliff. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation and the breakouts. And like I said, if you think this would benefit a conversation with your member of Congress or their staffers, please reach out to one of us, and we'd be more than happy to design the messaging and exactly the demo that you're trying to get across. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day.